supposed to be closed, but yeah, so we're in a new space. I had to run home 2 times to get extension cords, but we're going to make it work, and sorry about the angle of the projector. But yeah, thank you all for being here today. January is Volcano Awareness Month, so we at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory try to raise awareness about Hawaii's active volcanoes and recent events. So today we have Matt Patrick, who's a research geologist at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, and he specializes in eruption dynamics. So he's had a very busy year because we've had 3 eruptions in the past year from 3 different locations on Kīlauea volcano, and he'll be summarizing those events. So thank you.
Hey, so yeah, I'm Matt Patrick, geologist at Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. So let's see if this works. Yeah. the title is A Dynamic Year at Kīlauea. A lot's happened in the last year. I'm sure you guys have seen a bunch of it, particularly over the last couple of weeks. And here's the recent eruption. So yeah, we're kind of going to focus on what's happened in the last year, but then start with some background. So, you know, this is review for all you guys, but we're just talking about Kīlauea in this talk, southeast portion of the island of Hawaii, and of course there's the summit caldera, and then you got these rift zones, and some notable flows on the map, Pu'o flow field, which was active till 2018, and then the Lower East Rift Zone eruption from 2018. And so, yeah, we had activity at the summit here, the Southwest Rift Zone, and then out on the East Rift Zone. So it was moving around a lot. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is activity at the summit. So here's our most recent map produced by Mike there. And Kaluapele, the summit caldera, a couple miles across. And then in this deeper portion, we have the collapse, the subsidence area from 2018. Where I assume most of you were here feeling all of those magnitude 5.3. Yeah, so those earthquakes produced this big pit. And basically since 2018, we've had all this refilling of the crater, and the current eruption, this is the most recent eruption map, has been active on the west side of that crater, sending out flows for the most part on the west side. Okay, so yeah, we're talking a lot about the summit and Halemaʻamaʻu, and of course it's a good reminder that this is the home of Pele, and which obviously is associated with the fact that it has a long history of lava lake activity in the crater. And yeah, so this is actually, you can't see it, but it's 1893. So volcano tourism was a thing even in the late 1800s, and volcano tourism is still a big deal today, as we saw in the last week, if you tried to get into the park. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go, let's go back to what set the stage for the current activity, and that's really 2018. So we had a lot of things going on in 2018, but before 2018, we had 10 years of lava lake activity at the summit caldera. Halemaʻamaʻu looked like this, 0.6 of a mile, a kilometer, 0.6 of a mile across. And then we had this nice lava lake here that was active, like I said, yeah, a decade. I'm sure many of you spent many hours up there watching it. It was a really remarkable time to be up here and at the crater rim, be working in our old building at the caldera rim. I was at my computer. I could just twist my neck and see the lava lake. So yeah, it was a great place, great opportunity for science and of course tourism. But that all changed in 2018 when we had the big eruption out in Leilani Estates. It withdrew magma at a really high rate from the magma chamber, removed support from the roof of the chamber, which was the floor of the caldera, and caused that floor to collapse over 500 meters. Yeah, so there's a section of road there that dropped. There's the lake. Yeah, it's going to go through the cycle again. We had some small explosions going on, and then it basically, you can see, it just kind of drops like a piston. Yeah, there. That's basically the down drop block. Yep, so yeah, big changes in 2018 that really set the stage for what's going on today. And so this is before 2018. This is the summit caldera. There's Halemaʻamaʻu, and then after. I'll go back and forth. Before, after, before, after. So this is what we call the down drop block. And then this is Halemaʻamaʻu, which deepened, it kind of created this very deep flared geometry. It dropped about 500 meters here. So that's a lot. Okay, yeah. Oh. Well, so thinking about what happened after 2018, this is a plot of GPS. So it's basically showing ground displacement, and the way this is plotted, the values going up are basically inflation. So you can think of it's kind of like a proxy or an indicator of the magma chamber inflating or pressurizing. And then when the values go down, it's deflation or depressurizing. And so we had, this gradual inflation and pressurization all the way up to 2018, and then all that magma drained out to the east rifts, ley lining, depressurized, deflated, and then basically since then, and this plot actually only goes up to 2023, because I'm just talking about, up to 2024. We basically had recharge and refilling, repressurization of the summit magma chamber, right? But you could also see there are these little steps, and those are eruptions, little brief deflations when magma exits the chamber. It's a little hard to see, but this is earthquake rates, and basically just showing that there's a lot of seismic activity associated with these earthquakes, with the pressurization for all of these, eruption events that have happened kind of in the post-collapse refilling phase of the crater. Okay. Yeah, so let's look at, unfortunately you can't see, but it's 2019 down here to about just the end of 2023. And this is basically the phase of this kind of summit refilling, summit caldera refilling. And, halfway through 2019, all through this period, you can see there's a gradual inflation, right? Repressurization, recharge of the chamber. In 2019, we saw this appearance of this water lake, really deep down there. Unfortunately, you couldn't see it from the crater rim. That was the first historic, or I should say, in the last 200 years, the first basically record of a water pond or a lake at the summit. But that, there was that inflation continued right up until a critical point, and we had the first eruption. And subsequently, up until 2023, we actually had 5 of these eruptions at the summit. But let's talk about the first one. But actually, before that, let's talk about the water lake. So this is what it looked like. This is, the old parking lot. Here's the road. The parking lot was actually out here, if you ever went there. And then you'd walk to the overlook, which is somewhere around here, but just dropped and disintegrated, and you can see how it has this flared geometry here. But yeah, this is the water lake that was there for about 1.5 years. But then in December 2020, we had lava filling the bottom, not water. It boiled off the lake in like 1.5 hours. Lava was pouring from fissures into the bottom. It filled the bottom of this crater very quickly. And this is a thermal camera looking in the crater. This is the water lake, and you're going to see a time lapse of the eruption. So these fissures open, lava's filling the bottom very rapidly. Then you have this island of material, which is probably from lava pouring into the water and maybe having a little bit of low-level explosive activity. And you can see this island, it's like a raft, it's floating around in the lava, which is pretty interesting. But then as the days go on, the area of active lava is actually kind of diminishing. You get levees developing on the margins, and then it's retreating closer to the vent, which is right here. This is a pattern that we've seen for most of the eruptions. Okay, so one way we study or map out the eruptions is with thermal mapping. And we do these routine helicopter overflights. We have a handheld thermal camera, and we put it into fancy software that then stitches all the individual images into like a thermal map. So this is a sequence of thermal maps for the first eruption number 1. And you can see it was smaller because it was filling the bottom, and then eventually rose, filled up more. It's quite long. You have active lava that's filling almost all the floor of the crater here. You see the island is moving around and rotating. But then you can start to see the active lava retreat closer to the vent. And eventually, after a few months, it basically disappears. The eruption started in December, ended in May. So this diminishing area is also reflecting the decrease in the eruption rate. So these eruptions begin with very high eruption rates because you have really high overpressures in the magma chamber. It's like letting out air in a balloon. So really high rates, but then eventually, as that pressure is bled off, then the eruption rate decreases. Okay, so we had 5 distinct eruptions at the summit, 2020 to 2023. So that's what it was before, basically 2020. And then the first eruption, eruption number 1, filled in the deepest part of Hale-Ma'uma'u, of that collapse pit. So then we had months of quiet on the surface, but you can see that pressurization continued. It actually continued through the first eruption. But then we also started to see earthquakes reappear. It's interesting because the earthquakes basically disappear when you have these eruptions. The earthquakes are, the magma chamber is pressurizing, it's putting stress on the rocks around the chamber. Once that pressure is released, then the earthquakes kind of turn off. Once the vent opens, pressure is released, the earthquake shut off, more or less. But then the eruption ended, and so then you start to see the pressure increasing, and also you start to see more of that, more of the earthquakes. So by September, we got the first, or start of the second eruption. This eruption lasted for over a year. Vent on the west wall, in the initial days, it was filling much of the crater floor here. This is another thermal time lapse showing the vent here. And one cool thing, actually, you can see that the lava is retreating closer to the vent, which we've seen before. But the other thing that you can see is this process where, so most of the crater floor is solidified crust, right? And then you only have this lava lake here, but you can start to see that that solidified crust is slowly getting lifted, like inflated, right? But if you don't believe it from this sequence, this one is even more clear. So I think this is one of the best indicators of this endogenous, it's called an endogenous process because it's inside. So basically the vent is active there, right? There's a little bit of lava that's spilling on the surface, but probably the majority is actually channeled beneath the crust, and it's basically inflating the crater floor like inflating an air mattress. And there are also, like, you can see cracks develop and cracks closing and stuff as this surface is lifted. So this is a really cool, this is probably the best visual example of this endogenous process that I know of. Okay, so that was the second eruption. It sent lava a little bit north here, but it almost reached the level of the downdrop block here. Then we get to the third eruption. Well, there was a pause of a couple months. Well, no, actually just a couple weeks. And right at the start of 2023, we had eruption number 3. And this, actually the day before the eruption, we upgraded our webcams, and these new webcams actually had a greater capability to do video. So we were starting to capture these really dynamic processes that we couldn't really capture with the snapshots that we were collecting previously with the webcam. So like this is just moments after the eruption started. There's a little bit of lava pouring out, but then you can see this big pulse of magma kind of reach the vent. And this fountain is at least 100 meters here. Yeah, it was nice that there was good weather and the eruption started right in the afternoon. And then it creates this flood of lava that's traveling to the north. And then this really cool thermal that's rising. Yeah, so had kind of a better ability now to capture dynamic stuff like that at the summit. So that was the third eruption. The vents were over here, filled up more of this deeper portion, again, almost to the rim or the edge of the downdrop block. There was a couple months. Yeah, a couple months of pressure actually increasing at a higher rate, more earthquakes. And then in June, we had our eruption number 4. So this is June 2023. So this one happened 4 in the morning, right in the center of the caldera. And again, we had the video rolling, and this was a huge fountain. The wide angle kind of doesn't do it justice. It makes it look smaller than it is. But we were, actually, a number of us here were on the rim, watching this. There was enough seismic activity that it was a signal that, hey, there could be an eruption. So a bunch of us mobilized. We were on the rim. And I just remember this wall of incandescent lava just appearing, about seemingly like above me. And I also remember like total quiet. Yeah. So, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention to the sound. But it's huge. This was probably, we did it and it was 200 meters. So this is probably one of the tallest fountains on Kīlauea since the early Pu'uo'o days. And again, it just shows you kind of how like the onset of these eruptions have a lot of excess pressure. That's so they're really energetic in the opening minutes, hours, even days. So yeah, this is actually the opening first hour. We had the fountains here, and then this other fountain just broke out through the crust. And this eventually focused on the southwest wall, close to where the current vent is. And actually, it was very good viewing from like Volcano House area. I don't know if you remember this. It had a really beautiful cone here, spatter cone, great fountaining. Yeah, it was really photogenic eruption, but it was a little bit brief. Okay. Yeah, so that was eruption number 4. And it filled up very close to almost to the edge again of the down-drop block. Not almost. Oh, it's kind of lapping on to the lower part. The down-drop block kind of slopes down here, so it's kind of lapping onto that. So this is eruption number 4. And I should say all these maps and these map outlines are courtesy of Mike Zoller here. Okay, so we had 4. It was a very brief eruption, just 2 weeks, I believe. Continued pressurization, even more earthquakes, and we get to eruption number 5. This one was a little bit different because the fissure actually cut into the down-drop block, actually all the way up to this the 2018 poly here. This is the collapse wall. There's a little vent that went halfway up. So lava was pouring out of these fountains and flowing kind of to the west into the Hale Ma'uma'u area. This was a brief eruption. Was it a week or so? Wasn't very long. Yeah, so the vents were here, built some cones, which are still visible today on the down-drop block. Lava was kind of pouring out towards the north and west. Okay, so basically what we've seen is this story of crater filling over those 3 years, 2020 to 2023. And one of the ways that we measure this with great precision is using a continuous laser rangefinder. This is kind of a new instrument in volcanology. We're the only ones who use this in volcanoes that I know of. And actually, just last month, we were in Washington at a meeting presenting this method to other folks because it could be useful for other volcano applications. The instrument is great. It has, here you can actually see the blue line is basically it's a laser pointed at the lava surface. And you can see these fluctuations. These are days, so like these daily fluctuations, and they line up perfectly with the green line, which is ground tilt, which is an indicator of kind of the pressure of the magma chamber. So it's just showing that like the lava lake level fluctuates with the pressure of the chamber, which is something that we've known a long time, but we've never had measurements like this precise before. And we can actually compile all that laser rangefinder data to make a time series of the depth or the level elevation of lava in the crater through this refilling process. So in 2018, we had lava up here. This is basically the floor of Hale Ma'uma'u, before 2018, that kind of really broad flat area. And then we had the big drop when we had magma moving out towards Leilani. Then it was just kind of rubble. Then we had the water lake, the blue line here, fill up to about 50 meters. And then in 2020, with that first eruption, boiled it off, and it rose, well, almost 200 meters here. It filled up. It filled it up quick, obviously, because it has that flare shape. So it was didn't take much volume to really fill it up quick. And then we had eruption 2, which lasted a long time, and then 3, 4, and 5. So by the end of 2023, we're at 928 meters So we had, gone up 400 meters of refilling from the bottom was about 500 meters. So it's recovered much of that elevation that it lost since 2018. This is showing basically a bunch of things for those 5 eruptions from 2020 to 2023. On the top is basically the eruption rate. And this is, again, something that Mike is processing. And what it's showing is, and this is a log scale. So this is basically showing that these eruptions, they all have the same pattern where they start out really high. Like this is about 100 or over 100. It's 100 cubic meters per second. So what is a cubic meter? Something like this. Imagine 100 of them every second coming out of the vent. It's a lot. At any volcano, that's a lot, actually. And it was 100 cubic meters per second is maybe comparable to what was happening in Leilani with that massive channel. Pu'a'o is more like, when Pu'a'o was active, those pahoehoe flows that were active on the coastal plain, that was more like 3 to 5 cubic meters per second, really much lower. But you can see just within hours or days, the rate just drops. Again, as you're bleeding off pressure, the eruption rates drop exponentially. And we see that in basically the eruptions where we have good data like this. And then we're also seeing that SO2 emission rates. So this is the amount of gas that's erupted. It seems like it scales really well with the eruption rates, which makes sense because it's basically being carried by the lava. So more lava, more gas. And then we have seismicity. And this was just to show that you have more earthquakes in the kind of the buildup process to the eruption. And once the vent opens and that pressure is released, the earthquakes kind of shut off. So it's kind of an inverse relationship. This is, again, something that Mike has produced. And so it's kind of a cross-section of the caldera. So in yellow, it's before 2018. And this is Halemaʻumaʻu, it's about 80 meters deep. But then in 2018, we had the floor drop all over here. And this is the down drop block here. And this was about 500 meters. So then since that, in this phase of crater refilling, we've had the water lakes, about 50 meters, then we had 1, and then 2, 3, 4, and actually 5 is a little bit on top of that. It's just not shown here. I'll get to these numbers later, but in another plot. But basically, we've recovered about 400 meters of that 500-meter drop. But you can see, because of the flared geometry, it's going to take a lot more volume to fill that last 100 meters, right? Basically, we're only at about a quarter of the volume of that 2018 collapse, about 800 million cubic meters, and we've refilled about a quarter. Anyway, so that basically brings us to this year, or this past year, 2024. And I'm showing the GPS data again. So again, this is when we have increasing values or inflation, so pressurization, and then decreasing values or deflation or depressurization. And this is going back to 2010, and we had the build up to 2018, the big deflation event, and then we've had this repressurization, basically recharge of the summit chamber all the way up to today. And then again, you can see these little steps, and these are eruptions or intrusions, which we'll talk about. And we'll just zooming in on since 2018. Again, it's just a closer view of this step pattern. Pressure builds, and then a little bit's released when you have an eruption. And it builds again, a little bit's released, and it keeps going. But overall, it's an upward trend of recharge. This is a plot. Unfortunately, you can't see the years, but it's basically 2019 to 2024. And what it shows is, basically, this is earthquakes. And you kind of have to, you might have to kind of wrap your head around this, because it's showing basically it's the location of earthquakes above a magnitude 1. And if they go, it's the distance from Halemaʻumaʻu. And if they go in the positive direction, these are earthquakes that are going down the East Rift Zone to the east. And then if they're negative, they're going into the Southwest Rift Zone. So this plot was meant to show like the earthquakes, how they're changing through time and where they're going, through that period. And then the red bands or bars are the eruptions. And again, you can see how the earthquakes kind of shut off when you have an eruption, right? But what you can see is this is basically 2023 here. What you start to see is these earthquakes, most of them were close to the summit in this kind of orange band. Then in 2023, they really start moving away from the summit. And this is the Southwest Rift Zone. So in 2023, we started to see earthquakes going way down the Southwest Rift Zone. And then what you see, this is the beginning of 2024, January, we see this thick band of earthquakes that go down the Southwest Rift Zone. And what that is an intrusion. And basically, there was magma that was intruded from the summit area into the southwest, the area of the Southwest Rift Zone, I should say. And yeah, it was magma that was basically forcibly, intruded into the rift zone, and it created extensive ground cracking in this area around twin pit craters. So how many of you have been on the Mauna Iki Trail, like from Halenapali out? Yeah. If you've done it recently, you'll see a series of cracks. And a lot of these have been kind of filled in because of all this wind. It's real sandy out there, so the wind just kind of fills in cracks. But you can see, here's the trail, all the footsteps, and these are new cracks. And there are cracks everywhere, and some of them were quite wide. So this was a large intrusion. So a lot of magma was forcibly intruded into the area of the Southwest Rift Zone. Yeah, and so basically this is 2024 here, and that intrusion is this step. So as the summit was pressurized, it reached a point where that magma was intruded, so they pushed into the Southwest Rift Zone, and that caused the summit chamber to deflate a little bit. But it continued pressurizing. So just months later, with not too much seismicity, but there was a report from the volcano house of glow in the distance out towards the Southwest Rift Zone. Well, it turns out that was a very small eruption. It was June 3rd. So this is Mike's map again, and this is a very small eruption, 4 fissures, small pad of lava, 3 or 4 pads of lava. Again, it's in the Pu'u area, twin pit craters. This is the trail, the 1974, 1971 flow. Yeah, so this is actually the rampart of the spattering. It's pretty low. The eruption only lasted like 8 hours. And then the flow is pretty thin. So pretty tiny eruption. And actually, that's what the eruption is there. This is just showing kind of distance from the summit. And you can see there wasn't all that much seismicity, probably because this intrusion probably primed the Southwest Rift Zone. Presumably, it pushed a lot of magma in there, and it didn't take much extra rock breaking to force an eruption months later. But then, so now we're into June 2024. You start to see all these earthquakes now shift from the Southwest Rift Zone into the East Rift Zone. And this is the Upper East Rift Zone because it's close to the summit. And you see all these individual bands of lines of earthquakes. These are individual intrusions, small intrusions that are trying to force their way into the Upper East Rift Zone. So the summer of this past summer, there were a series of intrusions in the Upper East Rift Zone. So how many of you have driven Chain of Craters Road recently? Yeah, there's some new speed bumps. Yeah, extensive ground cracking, the most in years. So again, this is magma really trying as hard as it can to get into that East Rift Zone. And by September, this is an interferogram, an INSAR image. Basically, the colors and the bands show kind of ground deformation, displacement of the ground. And what it's showing is that magma was starting to intrude from the Upper East Rift Zone right here, starting to get into the Middle East Rift Zone past like Makopuhi crater here. So that's saying, hey, magma is going even farther into the rift zone. Of course, that's a concern because obviously it's a great concern if it starts going, past Pu'o'o into the residential areas of the Lower East Rift Zone. Thankfully, it didn't go that far. It stopped at Nepau crater. So here's the trail, Makopui crater here, Manaulu, and then Nepau crater here. There were fissures that opened on the west side of the crater and also across the crater and north part of the crater. I believe it destroyed most of that campsite and filled in or covered much of the crater floor. Yeah, so this is one of the opening days of the eruption. These are the fissures kind of on the wall or up on the upper, and then a fissure cutting the and then it was flowing down. Actually, pretty dramatic. I don't have that picture of the lava fall. It was pouring in into the crater. Yeah, and some spattering, impressive fountain. This isn't fountaining; it's more like spattering. But there was also some decent fountaining associated with that eruption. But it was short. It was only 5 days, September 15th to the 20th. And okay, so that was that little step. So we had pressurization, and then so that eruption relieved a little bit of pressure, but not much. Continued, the summit chamber continued inflating, pressurizing. So that gets us here. So you can see all that earthquake activity that's going into the East Rift Zone, and it finally produced an eruption out, 15 kilometers around the Nepau. And then a lot of that seismicity in the East Rift Zone kind of died out, right? And then you can start to see it kind of reappear in the summit area. So it looked like the earthquakes kind of returned to the summit. So Christmas Eve, there was the start of summit eruption 6. So this is our webcam, and the fountains opened up, fissures opened up on the west wall, and then actually across the crater floor, and covered much of all of Halemaʻu, and then onto the downdrop block here. So again, very vigorous onset, but the interesting thing about this eruption is you'll see it in just a little bit. Well, it's still high eruption rates, lava pouring out, covering the floor. Right. Oh, okay, and then reverse. So what happened is the eruption basically shut off after 12 hours, and so presumably the lava column, the pressure is bled off. So the lava column, you can imagine the lava column dropping in the vent, and that allowed all this lava that was poured out here in the pond to just pour right back into the vent. So this is drained back, and this is really common, like at Kīlauea. There were many episodes of this, but it's also common in anywhere where you have a vent that's kind of pouring into a pond. Oh yeah, this is another view from a different camera. Yeah, so big fountains there on that west wall. Initial fountains spread out across the crater floor, but then they focus. Yeah, really big, beautiful fountains here. And eventually you'll see this pour right back. But so yeah, this eruption was kind of interesting because it had a number of episodes, a bunch of pauses. So that first episode lasted for about 12 hours. What I'm showing here is seismic tremor. So it's basically like, it's not earthquakes, but it's basically kind of the constant vibration of the volcano. And it's often a good indicator of the vigor of the eruption, how intense the eruption is. So you can see these 3 episodes pretty clearly with the seismic tremor. Here's 1, 2, and then 3. The first one, yeah, very vigorous, and then a very sharp drop. And that's when we get that drain back. Then we had the second episode, and then a pause, and then a gradual build up to the third episode, another abrupt drop. This is showing the elevation of lava on the crater floor. So basically there was an increase in the lava filling the crater of about just a few meters in that initial episode, but then it to basically return to original level. Then with the second episode, it filled up a little bit more and kept that level. Then in the third episode, you start to actually see lava filling up more. And this is maybe, what, 10, 15 meters or so? Well, there was a little bit of, drop here. This is also showing ground tilt. And unfortunately, it's kind of cut off. But the ground tilt has been a really important indicator for this eruption, because you can think of the values going up are inflation and the values going down are deflation. And you can think of, okay, so right when the eruption starts, you have rapid deflation. And that's because you're pumping out all this lava and you're deflating the magma chamber at a very high rate. So you have that. But then that output of lava stopped. So that allows basically the supply of magma from below to recharge. Once you've closed the vent, then you can kind of blow up the balloon again, right? And so that's the inflation here until we got episode 2. And then once episode 2 happened, then we started to see, again, deflation, because you're pouring lava or magma out of the chamber, up to a point when that stops. The eruption paused, and you're basically able to recharge, re-inflate the chamber. And so you got that until eventually we had eruption resumed and you deflated again. What you can't see is that this was the end of that third episode, and what we've had since then is some gradual reinflation. So the vent shuts off, there's still supply from beneath the chamber, and it's gradually repressurizing, recharging. So yeah, this eruption was really spectacular. So I assume most of you, if not all, saw it from the rim. Yeah, so it was crowded, but it was still worth it to see these really great fountains. Some of these were 30, 40 meters, but then on other days they were 80, maybe 90 meters high. So pretty tall. And you can also see it's built this really extensive cinder cone. Yeah, this is just actually after one of the pauses when the vent activity was really weak, just producing there was no fountain, just lava kind of oozing out into a small pad here. This is kind of what recovery from a pause looked like. But then this is the third episode, kind of in full force, a large fountain, and then this is all that cinder cone that's kind of just abutting the crater wall. Yeah, and then the white-tailed tropic birds, the Kīlauea birds, just love to fly around the lava pond and around the fountain. They clearly are like riding the thermals, and then they drop down again, and then they kind of circle back. They do that almost continuously. And so yeah, these are the thermal maps from the recent eruption. So vent in the southwest portion, flowing out, covering most of the floor. We had a pause, and then a little bit of lava was oozing out in the kind of the restart phase. And then in the third episode, we had lava a decent amount of lava that was covering the western side of the crater floor. Yeah, so we have this live streaming camera that we put out a couple years ago. It's been a big hit because people can go on YouTube and see the live stream of the camera. Have you guys seen it? Yeah. So that was a big deal for us. And actually, this is when we first put it out. The lava now is like covering all this. But at that time, you could see everything. But since then, the lava has filled up so much that it started to get blocked by this part of the crater wall. There was only like one part in the crater that was really blocked to this camera, and it was right where the vent opened. So, but yeah, so we actually moved it, as I'll show in another slide, to get a better view. And you can capture some really cool stuff. Like this is the southern vent, that dominant fountain. But then keep your eye on the north vent here. This is the time that it shuts off. Yeah, so you can see how it shut off there. just collapse of the vent. Now, this is kind of a chicken or egg, because sometimes you often get these vents collapsing in when the lava column is kind of withdrawing, although I'm not sure if that was the process there. But in any case, this collapse was associated with the shutdown of this vent. Yeah, so we went out on New Year's Eve to, because it had that kind of blocked view, we actually moved it about 50 yards to the east. And so that fountain, the fountaining was, pretty vigorous, pretty tall fountains, and it was sourced from this area. And then you can see this brown area. This is all the tephra that's carried downwind. And you can also see here's Crater Rim Drive, right? This section is closed to the public, of course, but you can see it's covered by some thick deposits here. This is what it looked like. Yeah, pretty thick, and then even thicker where we have to put it in four-wheel drive to make sure we don't get stuck. Yeah, and so some of those clasts were pretty big, and but this is scarier than it looks, because it's basically got the density of it's so gas rich because these fountains are gas driven, right? So there's bubbles everywhere. The lava is super bubbly. This is basically like a kitchen sponge. So if somebody threw this at you, it wouldn't hurt that much. But when the plume when the fountaining was active and the plume was carried over the road, we were driving through, and some of the stuff was, falling out like confetti, or actually some of these were a little bit harder impacting. But yeah, hitting the vehicle. Unfortunately, I had one of the new vehicles. It's probably not great for the paint job. Yeah, so there's been some interesting dynamics with the lava that's ponded here. This is the vent here. This is a thermal time lapse. Vents over here, lava pouring out, and it's kind of built this levee here. So this is kind of a ponded area. And then you should see it kind of accumulating here, and then it kind of reaches a critical point. It's kind of ponding. Okay, suspense. Oops. Oh, maybe I actually, well, in any case, maybe I already forwarded through that. But anyway, there was ponding here that then basically like a dam break, the levee broke and lava was pouring out and pushing solid blocks of lava to the east. So it's a very dynamic surface. Katie just took this photo, beautiful photo. The weather has been amazing up here for this eruption. I think the crowds are the only issue, but it's still worth, some of the views were just amazing. Really great evenings watching the fountaining. Yeah, so on a couple occasions, we were able to get chopper down to the crater floor and collect molten samples. Drew here was can tell you more about the chemistry of those. But the intent, of course, is to learn more about the dynamics of that chamber and where that magma is coming from, to learn more about the magma plumbing system. Okay, so we've talked about the seismic tremor, the crater floor elevation, the ground tilt, and how since that third episode stopped, we've been kind of gradually reinflating. On today's overflight this morning, it's hot off the press. Katie was on the flight. You can see here so you probably see or heard or seen that there's some decent glow at the vent. And there is a little lava pond that's active, I guess, in both of these vents. This is the dominant vent, and the north vent. So yeah, basically what we had this inflation that led to the recent or current eruption, and a slight bit of deflation associated with that event. Not a whole lot, similar to the other episodes or other eruptions and intrusions. And then if we go back to our plot of all the floor of that crater since 2018, we had the big drop, and then we've had the refilling, 5 eruptions here, and now a 6th summit eruption. it's basically just gone up another 13 meters or so. That was just since 2018, but then actually there's a compilation and some other papers of a longer time span of the lava lake or the lava level in the crater going back to the early 1800s. This is actually, well, you don't see, this is 1820, all the way up to basically present. This is meters above sea level. And what it's showing is you see all these ups and downs, right? Now, some of these values are dubious because the surveying in the 1800s, the early to mid 1800s is, who knows how good that is. But probably the general trend of these ups and downs is correct, and many of these are associated with eruptions on the rift zones. Just like what we had here in 2018, where we had the lava lake level dropping probably to its deepest, so the caldera floor probably dropped to its deepest level that it ever has in the past 200 years, which is probably why this is the first observation of water, right? It's deep enough to actually intersect the groundwater table. But since then, we've had a very rapid recharge, refilling, just like we've seen in other episodes, although this one is especially large if we want to trust these values. And then this is Mike's cross-section again. Just a reminder that we've had, this is the collapse in 2018, and now we've refilled much of that elevation, but we're still only at about a quarter of the volume. And this whole talk, we've just been talking about Kīlauea, right? But there's another very potentially active volcano, or well, several, but Mauna Loa, obviously that's has hazard potential on the island, so that's a concern for us. This past year, we've actually done a lot of webcam upgrades. That's something that myself and others in our group have been involved in. Here's Seth installing one at South Point, looking up towards ocean view here. And then this is in the upper southwest rift zone, pan tilt zoom cameras, so we can remotely control and either look uprift or downrift. Yeah, so what did we see in 2024? Well, those GPS plots, which I've shown over and over and over, following 2018, we had the big depressurization, and now we've been in this state of recharge, right? Refilling, recharging of the summit magma chamber, with small drops associated with distinct eruptions, but still an overall trend of recharge. We've seen eruptions on the southwest rift zone, the summit, and the east rift zone in a single year. This is unprecedented in recent decades, maybe going back to maybe 1971 might be an example where you get maybe similar diversity in a short time span. But yeah, speaking of diversity, we've had a lot of different kinds of activity. Extensive ground cracking, actually southwest rift zone and east rift zone. We've had fissures, lava flows, impressive lava fountains. And I think the take-home point of what we've seen over the past year is that the summit pressurization has reached a point where it can now drive magma into the rift zones. So that's something that obviously we're thinking of going into the future when we think about, what's next. This is speculative, but just looking at the topography of the caldera, we still have what, 100 more meters to get back to pre-2018. Not saying it has to go back to pre-2018, but there's still a big pit out there that can be refilled. It seems to me like there's still more potential for summit eruptions in the coming years. It's not guaranteed or certain, but I think that's obviously a high. There's a high likelihood of that. So we're probably going to see. I suspect we're probably going to see continued summit eruptions. That doesn't exclude the possibility of other rift zone eruptions. And thinking of the rift zones, what we saw within the power eruption is magma got into the Middle East rift zone. This is, it's demonstrating that, the East rift zone, that magma could travel farther. And obviously we're keeping an eye, we basically have to stay vigilant, keep a close eye on the monitoring, to make sure that, or to see if there are any changes or signs that magma might be moving past Pu'o into the Lower East Rift Zone. Right now, there's no signs of that in terms of the seismicity or the ground deformation. There's no signs that magma is moving past Pu'o. But obviously, that's something, the fact that it got to Nepal, it's a reminder that we have to obviously keep a close eye on any signs that it could be moving farther. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, this pattern in 2018, we had caldera collapse, and now we've had refilling, right? So drain and refill. And that plot that I showed that went back 200 years, you saw all these different episodes of drain, refill, drain, refill. Well, the missionaries who came in 1823 to 1825, they basically kind of saw this process 200 years ago. And Bishop here said he was, within just a few months, the crater had filled to a height of more than 400 feet. So he was amazed at how quickly the crater was refilling since his last visit, basically. And then what's interesting, he said that he had local guides. He said the guides informed me that if the level in the summit crater rises a little higher, the lava is going to discharge itself, as it did formerly, towards the sea through some aperture underground. So they recognized this pattern, obviously, through years of observing the activity on Kīlauea, of this pattern that we've just been watching over the last 6 years of drainage, refilling, and now what we've seen in the last year is the magma has moved. Basically, what he's talking about here, formerly towards the sea through some aperture underground, he's probably talking, at least in part, about the rift zone, right? And so I think that basically kind of what we're seeing is basically what these Hawaiian guides were talking about 200 years ago. That when you reach a critical point of refilling in the crater, then you have the capacity to send magma into the rift zones. So, yeah. Any questions? Oh, yeah, that's okay.
So I'm struck that this is a new pattern, but it's sort of an echo of an old pattern.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately of the pattern of drainage and refilling. Like many of these events, actually, this is probably 1832, and this is 1840. Like, for instance, 1840 was a Lower East Rift Zone eruption that caused the summit to collapse, and then there was a refilling process over the subsequent years. But then it also happened in, 1868, although that was a little more complicated. 1830, probably 1823, although that's not measured here. 1832. The concept of collapse and refilling. I think it's really cool and interesting that we get to see that process here at the summit. Unfortunately, this collapse and refilling is often associated, not always, with flank eruptions. And obviously, unfortunately, those can be very hazardous. So, like we saw in 2018. So
to follow up on the pattern, in the 70s and up through 82, there were several instances where it was higher up. I don't know if it was directly inside the caldera, or it was not inside the crater. It was outside. Any likelihood, any indication that that could happen again?
Oh, yeah, sorry. The question was about, like in the 70s, like maybe 74, eruptions that happened like on the caldera walls or on the caldera rim. We may have seen a hint of that in the September 2023, where that fissure was kind of starting from Halema'u and out towards the cliff. But yeah, I don't see any reason why something like that couldn't happen. You know, fissures or cracks, fissures basically extending into the walls. Thankfully, all the activity has been nicely contained in that 2018 collapse pit.
Not a question, but all of our relatives on the mainland said thank you for the live cam.
Oh, okay.
They were all watching. We called them and they said, oh, we're watching. You don't have to tell us.
Yeah, we know how much, I mean, it's great, obviously great to get people engaged, and this is like one of the best ways to do that. And so that's why we tried to hustle to get the camera moved when we realized that that it really just needed a short move to get a much better view. There was that dead tree that was blocking the view for, yeah, the tree is still there. We just moved the camera. So yeah, we weren't cutting down trees. So yeah, I think right now the view is pretty good. Yeah. The sound? Well, yeah, I mean, when we're standing on the rim, I was just talking with folks out there a few days ago, well, a week ago, I guess. It sounds like really loud, heavy surf, like waves crashing. That, to me, that's how I would describe it.
When we first started, we could hear it
Oh, yeah?
from our house out
Oh, yeah?
on AEV Road.
Yeah, in the initial stages, you're probably then getting more like jetting sound. Yeah. So that's, yeah, like I've heard that too, where it's really energetic, really overpressurized, and it's, you know, gas driven, like a jet. Then it's kind of like when you get the steady fountaining, then it's more like a wave crashing. Yeah.
Well, that big drop in the middle, we can see the date. Is that around 1924 from that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is 1924, and that's when basically the continuous lava lake activity ended, and then we just had these like occasional episodic summit eruptions through the rest of the 1900s. And again, this is not something that we could probably publish because this has been published, but who knows about the quality of the surveying from 1823, so. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the structure of this zone, how they can repeatedly rush down those drift zones without fogging up. So after 2018, we lived there in the States, and we ran into our lives. We came up and moved to Volcano. But the thought that if we zoom down there again, it's almost just like thinking, is it safer that it has already done that?
Yeah, well, you can look back at like 1955 and 1960. Those were paired eruptions in the Lower East Rift Zone, just 5 years apart. So yeah, and I wouldn't say it could zoom down there super easy, but what we would see is, it was, at this point, it's going to have to break rock, intrude past Pu'o'o, and that's going to create a lot of seismic activity. So in 2018, that took, a few days to get from Pu'o'o, the 20 kilometers down into Leilani. Yeah, a lot of seismic activity to push a route there. So it would be, there would be clear signs of magma moving in that direction.
Still find that route, that drift zone is still there.
It's been around for quite a long time, thousands of years. So it's very much a zone. I mean, it's a couple miles wide. So yeah, it's not just one single crack or something. It's a whole series of parallel cracks and fissures. So. Yep. Thanks. Well, no, I'm trying to think the last time I was out there. Actually, I was there last year sometime. There's actually, one thing that I was amazed, there's actually plant life growing on the cone. So when it was active, it was just lava flows, no life whatsoever. But and I posted some photos on the web. But yeah, little ferns that are appearing even on the crater rim. So yeah, it's starting to get revegetated. Probably very slowly, but starting. Well, thanks for coming.